Okay, I think we will start now. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to participants from all over the world. I am Dr. Lawrence Foweather. I work for Liverpool John Moores University, and I will be your moderator for this session. Before we start this TAFISA Mission 2030 workshop on sport for all education, allow me to give you a few housekeeping rules. The first is that this session will be recorded. So if you do not want to appear, make sure that your camera is turned off. We have muted all your microphones by default. Please, if you have any questions or comments, which we really encourage throughout the presentations, please put those in the chat, and then I will put some of those questions to the speakers during the Q&A parts of the presentations. The full video recording of the workshop will be shared on the TAFISA YouTube channel, and we will give you an email once it's available. Now, to start this workshop, it's my pleasure to introduce the TAFISA Secretary General, Wolfgang Baumann, who will give a few words of welcome from TAFISA. Wolfgang, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, for these warm words of welcome. Indeed, I take it as a pleasure and privilege to say hello to all of you, be it in the morning, at midday, or in the evening. I'm lucky since here in Germany, where I'm calling in from, in Frankfurt, we have 12 o'clock. So it's a very comfortable time. And as I said before, we are indeed benefiting right now from quite nice weather. Spring has started, and this, of course, changes the mood of a lot of German people, even though, of course, we are all very much focused by the war and the crisis in Ukraine. But this is not the topic of today. I would also like to share the greetings from our TAFISA president, who I'm also only called with or talked with this very morning, Professor Juho Chang, who is from Seoul, and he also gives his best wishes to the success of our event today. Yeah, I'm very happy to, on behalf of TAFISA, say hello. TAFISA, as some of you might know, is the leading international sport for all association. We are approaching our 400 membership, and we are a non-for-profit organization that has its headquarters in Frankfurt. And this already gives me the opportunity to say thank you to Gaëtan, my colleague, who has been preparing this. And of course, my thanks go to all of those also in Liverpool that have behind the scenes helped to prepare and organize this event. Yeah, time is going by, and it's already the 7th Mission 2030 workshop that we are organizing. It has become now a sort of regular event, and I'm happy to say that we have learned from our statistics that we have, so to say, 35% of our followers that are regular attending our event. And this makes us, of course, proud and happy, because we apparently have succeeded in making this an event that people are looking forward and following regularly. Yes, we have started from rather humble beginnings, but by now we can count more than 2,500 participants that have over time attended our workshops. There can be no doubt, not just because we have this famous soccer trainer from Germany working in Liverpool, that we are very proud to cooperate today with John Moores Liverpool University. Indeed, this is an organization or an institution that we have close ties with for the last 10 or so years. It's always a pleasure to working together with the university, but in particular the people that are representing the organization. And I'm not sure whether he is attending today. I haven't yet checked the participant list, but of course my special greetings also go to Professor Keith George, who is actually the Commissioner for Education for TAFISA. So this is a volunteer profession and function. But once again, we are extremely proud that we have this eminent, important university at our side. This time we have a special topic. We will explore how sport for all can be utilized to benefit and enhance education, which we are sure it can. And for that reason, the focus of our today's workshop is education. Typically, when we think of sport and education, we think of physical education at school. And indeed, it is important that children of learning age receive quality physical education. But beyond physical education, there are many ways in which Sport for All can help children to develop and to learn important skills for their whole lives and connect with educational opportunities, both formal and informal. We are honored to have with us today's speakers from very, very different backgrounds. I guess this is also a little bit the success story behind these workshops, that we are looking around and identifying speakers that at the end of the day make a fit, but indeed coming from totally different backgrounds, and who can reflect the diversity of initiatives and ways in which Sport for All can indeed be utilized to serve and enhance the education of children. So once again, to all of those who are speaking and supporting today, our sincere gratitude. And without further ado, I would like to revert to Lawrence, but also by saying good luck for today. I'm personally looking forward to listen, and we will see how it goes. Thank you very much for having you with us today, and let's see what this event will bring.
Thank you, Wolfgang. So yeah, also really excited by the list of speakers that we have for you today. I just want to extend the welcome from us here at Liverpool John Moores University as well. So as I said, I work for the university. We are very proud of our partnership with TAFISA. It goes back at least 15 years. And I work as part of the Physical Activity Exchange within the Research Institute for Sport and Exercise Sciences. We are quite a large department. We've got about 90 academic staff. We've got 1,700 students. We were the first degree in sport and exercise science in the world. So we've got a long heritage, and we're very proud of that history, really. In the exchange, we do our best to try and ensure that we can promote evidence-based research, policy and practice. And we're very passionate and proud of our work in terms of physical activity promotion and sport for all. So we do our best to try and demonstrate the impact, because we know how powerful sport for all can be and how much of a positive force for change sport is. And we're going to see some brilliant examples of that today, which we can share with you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the first keynote speaker, who is Dr. Dean Dudley from Macquarie University, and he's also an associate professor at the University of Queensland as well. So Dr. Dean Dudley, can I pass over to you, please? Can you share your slides? That's okay.
I sure can.
Thanks.
Is that working?
Yes, that's perfect.
So do you want me to start?
Yeah, please, Dean, if you can go.
Okay. Okay, so thanks everybody, and thanks Steve for inviting me, and Lawrence and Wolfgang for the segue. So very brief introduction. I'm an academic in Australia who probably spent the best part of the last 15 years investigating this question, this broad question in a range of different ways about what drives a quality what is quality physical education really, and how does it manifest, and what defines it. Some of the projects I've been involved in that you may be familiar with are the UNESCO Quality Physical Education Guidelines and the Kazan Action Plan. So I've been working with UN agencies and agencies all around the world to try and make a stronger case about the things we need to be doing in physical education around the world to achieve the goals that, like we heard Wolfgang say, that we actually think physical education stands for, why we teach this as a subject in schools. So I'm going to start off with a very quick video. Some of you may have seen it, and then I'm going to provoke the conversation from there. Okay, so some of you may have seen this, but we'll do it very quickly. Okay, so in that video, something, you know, there are a lot of catch cries around all the things we want physical education to do. We want it to be inclusive, regardless of gender or religion or ethnicity. We want it to be inclusive of ability and disability. We want it to make people better citizens. We want them to be self-confident. When you break it down into its smallest components, essentially what physical education is to do is this. Oh, next one. Essentially what it needs to do is this. It needs to, whoops, go back. It needs to develop the whole child. Okay. And to develop the whole child, when we have physical education in schools, it's not just about developing their physical self. It's not just about their activity levels or their fitness levels or their fundamental, the motor skills they acquire. When we talk about quality physical education, yes, we're interested in their physical learning and development, how they learn to move their bodies, but we're also interested in when they move their bodies, how does it change the way they think and how does it change the way they use cognitive processes? And you saw that in the video, it was about, you know, driving broader learning participatory outcomes. It's also around driving motivation, right? So this is the effective learning domain and effective development. What drives their confidence? What drives their motivation to be active, to live a healthy pursuit life, to participate in society? And then obviously, and you know, sport has spoken about this for a long time, it says that it's a great social enabler. You know, it connects us to people and it sees across boundaries of ethnicity and race and religion, and it helps us with those communication skills. So the body of work that I've been doing for probably the last 2 or 3 years is trying to collect all the studies that have been published, all the academic literature that's been published for the last quarter of a century that has tried to use physical education as a vehicle to change one or more of these learning and development outcomes in children, right? And essentially what you're going to see tonight is a synthesis of all that literature. So it's quite a substantial piece of evidence. So I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to just talk you through the process without bogging you down in the statistics so much. So essentially what I've looked at with some colleagues is all the interventions, all the programs that have been run and published in journal articles that have tried to improve psychomotor, cognitive, affective, or social learning and development outcomes in children. And what you see here on the right is basically a plot of the effects of all those studies, right? So what I want you to just pay attention to really quickly, see that red line that just popped up? That red line indicates studies on that line have zero effect. So they've run an intervention, they've run a PE program trying to influence one of those outcomes, and it's had absolutely no effect on the outcome that they tried to impact on. So what you'll notice is everything to the right of that line has had a positive effect. Yeah. So what should jump out at you straight off the bat is, one, there's a lot of studies that have been done in the last 25 years to try and influence this development in children. And what else should jump out at you is that a lot of them have positive effects, right? So let's break this down a little bit and it'll start to make some sense in the argument. So I actually was able to locate over 135 studies that were either randomized controlled trials, or quasi-experimental trials. So studies of high causal rigor. So studies that people have done and controlled for to try and determine whether PE has a causal effect on these outcomes. So 135 unique studies that had within them over, they had over 193 effect sizes. You don't need to worry about that, but over 135 studies. They used 57 different approaches to try, in those 135 studies, 57 different approaches to try and influence psychomotor, cognitive, affective, or social learning. They represent 23 countries, so it's quite diverse. It's not all North America and the UK and Europe. It's come from studies from South America, Central America, Asia. Africa was actually the most underrepresented continent, unfortunately, but 23 countries nonetheless. The studies capture just over 42,000 students, ranging from kindergarten all the way through to year 12. So we're talking age ranges about 5 years of age all the way through to about 18 years of age. And for just this last stat is kind of interesting. So the studies I'm going to present to you today, the effect that PE has on these outcomes, or certain approaches to PE have on these outcomes, for you to refute those findings and say, actually, Dean, you've got it wrong. It has nowhere near that effect, or it's way better than that. Well, actually, to say it actually has no effect, you would have to locate, and I'm happy for you to try and do it, 12,641 studies that say it has no effect. Right, so good luck with that enterprise, but that's the power of the effect sizes I'm going to report. So in base, for every study that I say that it has a positive effect, you'd have to locate 66 that say it have a negative or null effect. So it's a very substantial body of empirical evidence. So what I'm going to talk to you today is, because there's so many studies, there's 57 different ways people have tried to influence these outcomes. It's really not fair for policymakers in schools or teachers or even coaches in schools to say, okay, so I just do, if most of them have a positive effect, I can just do any of them, right? You'd go nuts. So what I've tried to show you here is that most studies done in physical education have a positive effect. Right. So if most of them have a positive effect, so much so, here's the stats, 93%. 93% of studies run have a positive effect. This is important because when you read the empirical literature, most of the studies are going to say, we ran an intervention and it worked. Absolutely it did. The problem is because so many work, that's not a strong enough argument. We need to say what works best, because we can't afford to just do 57 different types of intervention and see what works, right? So my argument is if everything works, or nearly everything works, what I want to show you is what works most, what works best. And here's the argument that educationalists have made for other areas. So there's a very famous researcher, some of you may or may not have heard of him. His name is John Hattie. He is a psychometrician, a New Zealander, but he's based in Australia, has been for the last little over a decade. And what John did is he looked at all the stuff schools and teachers do, really, schools, teachers and parents do, to improve learning in students in schools. And what he found is the average effect, just don't let these stats scare you, this effect size is essentially a change in the standard deviation from the mean. And it's about D.40 is, it's 0.4 of a standard deviation that it's improved, right? And this is a meaningful statistic in things like in psychology and in medicine, for example, because that 0.5, for example, 0.5 of a standard deviation in clinical terms is observable behavior change. So I'll give you a bit of an example. When a child suffers from ADHD and takes medication, in terms of their behavior improvement, it changes by about half a standard deviation on observed measures of behavior change. So 0.4, John says in his work in schools, is that when we do stuff in schools to improve learning and student achievement, the average effect is 0.4. And his argument is if the average is 0.4, why would we invest in anything less than that? Like, let's just pick the things that are better than 0.4 and spend our time doing those, because we know they work and that they get better growth, they get better gains in learning and development. So what I did was essentially looked at, well, let's have a look at all the PE studies and see what the average effect size, because we know that 93% are positive. What's the average effect size for PE? Well, it's interesting. Oops, is it going to do it? It's not far off. It's 0.32, right? So it's fairly close. So the average is 0.32. So what I've done, though, is it's not the same for every learning domain. So it's 0.32 across the board. If we just think of physical, social, psychomotor, social, cognitive, and affective learning, if you put them all together, the average effect size is 0.32. But when you break it down into those specific learning domains, there are things that you can do if you want to improve, for example, students' cognitive learning, so their problem-solving abilities, their thinking capabilities, right? If you want to improve their cognitive learning, the average effect size of things we do in PE is actually quite small. It's about 0.17 of a standard deviation. And this shouldn't surprise us, because all the studies and you would have seen them, right? You would have seen stuff by John Grady and from Harvard, that the Spark, that says, yeah, exercise is important. And you all remember the brain scan that lights up when kids do exercise. That's Chuck Hillman's work. And he says, look, this is why kids need to exercise, because their brains work more. Well, they do. But in terms of them actually thinking, it only improves their performance in tests or academic skills by about 0.17 of a standard deviation. That's the average effect size. It's the same in PE. It's almost the same as it is in sport and physical activity stuff. But there are things that we do in PE that actually get much better than that 0.17. And the best bet in terms of the pedagogies are game-based approaches to teaching physical education. So if you do things like tactical approaches to teaching, some of you will do this in your coaching as well, game sense approaches, commonly known as teaching games for understanding. So the Bunker and Thorpe model to teaching, where we use the game as a mechanism and we ask questions about why students are doing things, why are they making certain tactical decisions, when are they making them, what skills do they need to solve them as they play the game or the modified version of the game. Those game-based approaches have almost double the effect of nearly everything else that they've tried to do to boost cognitive learning. The interesting thing is there's lots of things that are really quite weak. So actually less than 0.1, they should say less than 0.17, not 0.135, sorry. So if you just give kids more PE, it's not going to drive up their test score. They'll go forward, but it's only 0.1 of a standard deviation. It's actually quite small. So more PE isn't the answer, right? Yes, they will improve, but they're not going to improve at a rate that's above average. The other one too is the physical activity PE, where it's about getting the kids out there and just getting them as active as we possibly can for 45 minutes or an hour in PE. Activity for activity's sake does not drive cognitive learning or cognitive development. So much so, it's about 0.6. 0.06 standard deviation, which is you couldn't even notice it. And the scary bit is that when your PE is purely driven on fitness testing or fitness outcomes, so strength and cardiorespiratory fitness, and that's all you're doing, or that's the primary focus of your PE program, sometimes the cognitive learning goes backwards, right? It becomes a real demotivating factor for learning, right? They don't see the point in why they're expected to solve problems and learn through their bodies. Does that argument make sense? Can I get a little bit of a nod if it's kind of resonating with you? I can see some of you. So that's the argument we're making. So the average here is 0.17. So what are all the things that are better than 0.17? And for cognitive learning, games-based approaches definitely work. And I imagine many of you coaches use those modified small games, asking tactical questions of your players. And it really does drive their thinking better than other interventions. When it comes to social learning, I've done these in order. Social learning is the next one. And the average effect size for social learning is about 0.32 of a standard deviation. So it's a lot better than the cognitive learning. I've only used the best and the weakest bets if there were more than 3 studies on one particular intervention type. So if there were less than 3 studies, I didn't find the average. So it was really, the evidence is a bit inconclusive. And if you're doing any research on the social development of children, learning and development of children is really understudied objectively using good quality research, randomized control trials. There's just not enough of them. But the thing that does work is cooperative learning. So when you actually put kids in scenarios where they have to go and work together to solve a problem, it's almost like forced socialization. That does consistently get above the 0.32, which is the average for all the interventions they've done that try to improve social learning. The next one is effective learning. And this is, we talk very heavily around motivation in PE all the time, what it takes to get kids motivated. Now, the average effect size when they try and make a difference in this domain is very strong. It's 0.47. So it's above the average across the board. So here is, I think, is really significant. So you want to be targeting things that are above 0.47 if you actually want to switch kids on long term to motivating them to learn, drive their learning motivations in physical education. And what's really interesting in some of the models here that work. So the first one is, the highest one is mastery teaching, or the target model. So the target stands for task, authority, recognition, grouping, evaluation, and time. And it's a model that was proposed by a guy named Epstein. The critical part of the model, and I think this is really important because it's no longer in vogue really in physical education, is the time piece. So the pace of instruction. The pace of instruction needs to be based on mastery, right? So what that means is that mastery teaching. So we don't move on to more complicated things, more difficult things, until they've shown a degree of mastery about what we've been trying to teach them, whether it's a throw or a game or whatever it is. So the mastery is a really critical element of that target model in driving up that. And that speaks to some of the psychological literature that's kind of not popular anymore, but it actually works. Things like competency motivation theory that Sue Harter and Maureen Weiss spent a lot of time talking about. It's very in vogue to give kids more choice and autonomy in PE, and pick and choose what sort of activities you want to do. And yes, that does have a strong motivating factor, but it's the only thing it does. It doesn't really resonate on any of the other learning areas. So giving kids choice is great in terms of driving their motivation, but I would say use it judiciously. The third one there, and you should take some real heart out of this, is that sport education. This is the Daryl Seidentop model. And if you're not familiar with it, this is about exposing kids to more than just playing sport in PE. This is about teaching them how to coach, how to officiate, how to fitness train, how to do the statistics, all the elements of sport that need to come together to make sport happen. Because sport isn't just about playing, being a player. Right? It requires coaches, officials, managers, mascots, statisticians, publicists, right? And the sport education model, if you haven't done any research on it, is fabulous. Daryl Seidentop is the original author of that from the US. It has really great impact on motivating kids to be involved and learn in PE. So the weaker ones, fitness-based PE tends to be a little bit demotivated. It has a positive effect, don't get me wrong, if it's done well, but it's not above that threshold, but it's pretty close. Teaching games for understanding, again, I'm not putting too much weight in these two. See how they're pretty close to the average? The average is 0.47. They're within the error of margin, so they're pretty close. But the big one, and I can't stress this enough, is the physical activity promoting PA. So the PE, the one where it's about go and get the kids as active as you can for as long as you can. This, in terms of motivation, yes, it's positive, but it's very, very small. Very, very small. The last one, and this is my second last slide, is the psychomotor learning domain. Now, you would say that we should do well in this learning domain, right? Because this is about developing skills and movement capacity. Well, and if PE teachers can't do this, then maybe we're in the wrong job. But it has a very positive effect. Over half a standard deviation is the average. So when people are doing things well in PE classes to develop skills, because remember I said that half a standard deviation is the observable difference. When you're doing things well in skill development, they stand out. That means you can go into a class and you'd be able to tell just by looking at them which ones have had the quality PE instruction, because their skill development and their execution of movement will be so much more refined. So what works in this space? So again, that target mastery model about mastery, not letting them move on too quickly until they've got a degree of mastery solving a movement problem. Sport education, again, which is really surprising because it's not all about being a player. People find that they can learn skills when they're officiating and they're coaching. It forces them, why I think this works is it forces them to intellectualize their movement and think about why and how they do things, which makes it so risk. It shouldn't surprise us that if we increase the amount of PE, we're going to get more psychomotor development, aren't we? Because it becomes frequency of practice. So yes, it has a positive effect, but it's the only domain it impacts on. It doesn't really have major impacts on anything else. Games-based pedagogy is there. So the teaching games for understanding, the tactical approaches, they show up again. And fitness-infused, fitness-based PE also drives psychomotor development. So the things that should jump out to you are the things that you see across multiple domains here, because they're pretty good investments. So this one, target and mastery, sport education, and games-based pedagogy. You've seen those more than once, right? So they're the sorts of things that we can do in PE and possibly in your coaching programs that are going to hit more than one learning domain in child development. The weaker bets, again, are those health and physical activity, say, physical activity-based models, right? Yes, they're positive, but they're typically much weaker than the more focused pedagogies. Last slide. So, conclusion. If you take nothing else away, take away this. If someone tells you that we did something in PE and it has a positive effect, you know what you should turn around and say? Of course it did, because nearly everything does. Right? So the question is, how big is that effect? And without being too controversial, size does matter. And in this case, effective size. What is the size of the effect? Is it better than the average? And that's what we want to focus on. The hinge point, so what we know in PE from lowest to highest has the least effect on cognitive learning, then social, then affective, and the most impact on psychomotor. So our interventions should look at which learning domain we're going to target and then adjust accordingly. I didn't put in the slides, but you should know that secondary school interventions, so those adolescent years, have stronger learning gains than the primary school. So don't fall for the argument for in secondary schools where they say it's too late, they didn't learn the skills at a young enough age that you can't teach them now. That's nonsense, because the interventions that we run in secondary schools actually have a much larger impact than the primary schools, but they need to be tailored. And like I said, but just be wary of the sweeping claims, that everything, we did something in PE and I know I'm making a difference. Well, guess what? Everything does. So how you do it and why you do it matter more than ever. And that's the end of my slides. I've probably gone a little bit over, but I'm probably pretty close to Lawrence. So I hope that's okay.
Yeah, excellent for time, and Dean. Thank you very much. That was awesome. A really interesting and insightful talk, and a fantastic piece of work, really, that such a large scale review that must have taken a long time to do. But you kind of synthesized the findings really nicely for us. So I guess I've got some questions. First one really is probably based on, the way you've kind of identified the best and the weakest bets, if you like, in terms of the different pedagogies. Can we design resources to steer PE or teaching or coaching in the right direction and have the greatest impact? So what would they look like? And are you aware of anything really that existing teachers or coaches can use to support their work, and maybe in some of those pedagogies that you've advocated for?
Yeah, so what I would argue is probably, yes, we should be developing resources like this now that we have this evidence, right? So this might take a while because it's actually under review with a journal at the moment. But I'm hoping that we get to a point where we start to target saying this is the aspect of development that we're trying to work at in our teams or our coaching teams or in our classrooms, our PE class. So I'm going to set up an intervention that sits like that. Now, the best models to provoke that thinking that I've seen have been some of the physical literacy models that have come out. So the Australian Sports Commission, I'm being a little bit biased here because I worked on it. It does exactly that. It looks at the 4 learning domains, and some organisations down here in Australia, golf is a good example, where they've changed their coaching from just teaching the technique of golf to say, well, how do I couple a social learning outcome to that? And they've used games-based pedagogies because they know that they work to say, okay, in our coaching programs, not only are we going to focus on the psychomotor development, we're also going to ask a cognitive question about the why and the how. Right? Or I've seen in schools that use a sport education model, for example, and say, okay, it's all right. And it's actually really helpful that I just don't focus on them playing. So I want kids to learn how to officiate and coach and train for fitness, other players. They get a really integrated learning dynamic. So physical literacy has been a really popular construct to start to think through these things. So New Zealand has a model. We're doing some work in the Pacific. I worked on a really long project in the European Union last year that was finished up, which is good. I know there's been some work done in the Caribbean for a fact. I know there's been some work done in India. So countries are sort of piecemealing this, but they're working on the philosophy of physical literacy, which I think is helpful because you're starting to think of the whole child or the whole person. Now's the time to say, well, okay, if I want to address the whole person, how do I do that? Here's some starting evidence to say, well, let's develop resources that are aligned with these teaching approaches or these ways of teaching and our game, our sport, our students.
Okay, thanks, Dean. Just to follow up, you on your conclusion slide, you talked about there being a difference between primary and secondary age children. So children under the age of probably 11 and 12, and then young people maybe 11 and over. Why is that, do you think? And also, why have you maybe has there been largest effects in the older children, the young people? Yeah. But also, I guess, really, does the approaches that you've advocated for from the review, are they equally appropriate for children as they are to young people? So would a games-based approach be a good approach for younger children and so on?
Yeah, I think where it depends, the games-based approaches didn't work particularly well in the they worked, they just didn't work as well as they did in secondary school. So teaching games for understanding, for example, had a cognitive effect in primary schools. It just wasn't as large, and there weren't as many studies. The big impact that we actually have, the biggest impact we have in primary schools, it's actually bigger than it is in secondary schools, is effective learning, right? What you can do is you can get kids motivated and switched on in the primary years that can then carry over into the secondary. A lot of people believe, wrongly I think, is that psychomotor development, if they don't have the basic certain skills by a really young age, it's too late. I will say it's harder when they reach young adolescence or when they move into secondary school, but there are still big gains to be made. So if you're working with adolescents or young teenagers and they've come to you and you see a skill deficit or psychomotor development, don't think it's too late. because it's not. Because what you do will have a big impact in a short period of time. I don't know if that answers your question totally, but I thought it might help.
No, it did. Thank you. And we're getting some good questions through in the chat now. So I'm just going to put one to you. Can you give some examples of mastery target teaching in PE to help the audience better understand the meaning of the concept? So what do we mean by mastery target teaching?
Yeah. Okay. So when we're talking about mastery teaching or mastery coaching, so PE is a little bit different from coaching. So quite often what coaches will do, they tend to do this a little bit better than teachers do, because teachers are driven by a curriculum to say you've got to get through this much work on this topic in a certain set of time, right? So they're driven by the curriculum and those constraints, so they tend to rush through things, right? And if you don't master something, or if you miss a skill or a critical learning point, the lesson keeps going because it's carrying 30 students or 60 students or however many, it just keeps moving on. Coaches who work with a small number of athletes tend to pay more attention before they make anything more difficult for the team, or before they make anything more difficult for the athlete. They tend to be more honest to say, okay, you need to master this before we can move on to something more difficult. Right. So the mastery teaching, and what PE teachers need to do is take that same mindset and differentiate their class, not based on whether they're a boy or a girl. Right. It makes very little difference until they're really in late adolescence. They need to be looking at their class and say, these kids need extra time on this skill instruction or this rule or this tactical problem. And then when they can solve it in this simpler way, then I can scaffold it and make it more difficult for them, right? PE doesn't do that job particularly well. We segregate our classes on really false evidence. You know, we go, okay, boys on that ground, girls on that ground. No. There are girls that are going to benefit from being with boys, and boys are going to benefit from girls. You're in a co-ed class. It's really about matching. This is where you are at your learning in terms of your development, and you need to stay together, and you get to move on to this next more difficult, complex situation when you've shown a degree of mastery in it, so you don't leave them behind. Jose, does that answer your question? I can see you there. So
yeah, that did. Thank you. I've got a question. I don't know whether you had anything in regards to studies that had looked at adapted PE or students with disabilities.
Actually, they unfortunately they were excluded in this review, but it is my intention to do one explicitly on that topic. Probably in the next 2 years. There's a lot of literature on adapted PE, and inclusion, as you would have seen that UNESCO video, is quintessential. What we do know, I have published another paper on this, is what we know about inclusion of children with disabilities. It has a great social learning effect, not on the kids so much that have the disability, but on the able-bodied kids. It normalizes ability. So the more inclusive your PE and lessons are of kids with disabilities, the social learning is a real, I haven't done the meta-analysis on it, but reading the literature rather broadly, the normalizing effect it has on, we'll say, able-bodied children is really dramatic. So yeah, thank you for asking that question. And now you've asked it, I've got a fire in my belly to go and do that bit of research.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for the question. I think it's Rosa in the audience who asked that question. So thanks, Rosa. Okay, Dean, listen, thank you very much. That was brilliant. We're going to have to move on now to the next speakers. So thank you very much for your time and appreciate that. And there may be some other comments and questions in the chat. So if you do have a chance, have a look at those, Dean. And if you want to respond to them, feel free. All right. Okay, so, and if not, I'll try and pick them up in the Q&A at the end. Okay, so now what we've got is a range of excellent talks from practitioners who are going to share some brilliant examples of their sport and education for all programs. The first of which is going to be Christopher Manning and Leah McAteer-Thomspon from Liverpool FC Foundation. I'm sure there might be some Liverpool fans amongst you. But their Liverpool Foundation, Community Foundation, does amazing work, and we'd like to share some of that work with you today. So can I get Chris or Leah, can you share your slides now, if that's okay?
Lawrence, yeah, first of all, just from ourselves at LFC Foundation, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure, a privilege to be presenting to you today. And again, following on really nicely from Dean's speech, which was fantastic, really got a lot from that. just a bit of a background on ourselves. Hopefully the slide should start appearing now. If you could just give us a thumbs up to make sure you can all access the slides.
You just need to switch the display settings again, Chris, so it's the full slide shows on the main screen.
Oh, thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, I'll just adjust that now. Be a second.
If you go into display settings at the top. And
oh, I see. Yeah, sorry about that. There we go. Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
Thank you. So just a bit of a brief background from ourselves. Obviously, my name is Chris Manning. I'm a former primary school teacher, established coach and primary mentor. And I've been working at the foundation for a 3-year period. My role is to provide high quality PE teacher CPD, where I upskill primary school teachers on different approaches to PE, instilling more creativity and problem solving into the curriculum. I also studied PE to a degree level with advanced curriculum specialism in physical education. I'm just going to introduce Leah to explain a bit of a background of her own experiences with the foundation.
So hi everyone, I'm Leah McAteer-Thomspon. I'm a coach at the foundation and a programme coordinator for our Women and Girls programme. I started off at the foundation about 5 years ago, and I actually started on our volunteer programme, and I've been able to develop and work my way up. I've had great opportunities to coach around the world, currently FA level 2, working towards my UEFA B licence.
Thank you, Leah. So again, our presentation today is all centred on the impact of our We Girls Can Female Empowerment Programme upon female confidence. So a bit about the background of the programme. As a team, we often come together at the end of term periods, etc. And based upon conversations from our teachers in our school, close association with pupils as well, we try and implement programmes that are currently not traditional around the city. And this is a programme that we've prepared in association with one of our key partners called Joy Baby, all related to female empowerment, as from our own experiences in school, upon having conversations with teachers and pupils alike. There wasn't a programme currently in circulation like this that also promotes female empowerment and the key messages displayed on the screen. Self-esteem and confidence, barriers within sport, resilience, diversity within female sport. So we look to provide a collective programme which allowed females within year 5 and 6 upper key stage 2 age range the opportunity to have their own intervention where they would explore these issues and these key themes across a workshop, also applying them from the workshop shortly afterwards into a practical example. The key messages that we look to instill across the programme to our participants was how to promote female empowerment to other people, and more importantly other females within the school, being good ambassadors, and we'd look to leave them as female empowerment champions so that we could go from school to school and promote female empowerment champions, so that those key messages that we would study would ultimately not leave with us, they would stay within the capacity of the school. How they can be resilient and bounce back from tough times, and also potentially when they start at high school, a new setting, new challenges that they may face, how to make them mentally resilient and almost excited to take on new challenges. Why they should stay involved in sport and physical activity during high school, as some of you may typically know, at first it's obviously an overwhelming experience, particularly in our research. As a team, females look to not uptake in sport as much as males would do. So this is obviously a key aim of the programme. We wanted to rectify that statistic. And also it's monitoring personal well-being and making them feel as though they've got all of the tools provided from ourselves to become positive female empowerment champions. I'm going to hand over to Leah now, who's going to talk about the school engagement we had on socials.
So our school engagement, we kept up to date with schools throughout the week, reminding them of certain topics we worked with that week, maybe the challenges that we'd set. A massive one for us was implementing the sport sessions to transition the messages that we teach in the classroom outside and using their everyday life. For example, as Chris touched on, their resilience. A big one was the first school we worked in was around football. They chose as their sport, and their issue was it was quite, all the lads played on the playground. They wasn't really allowed to be involved. Some of them didn't really have the confidence to get involved with that, whereas some did. So when we worked with them throughout the weeks, throughout that, they ended up building their own girls football, taking that on, so they was resilient against what was already there. Also how they reacted in sport sessions, the confidence, the leadership and the teamwork, and it was shown across all the different sport sessions we done and delivered throughout their school.
Great, thank you, Leah. So moving over to our pre-program identification process, which is obviously fundamental in attracting the right females who need the opportunity, is based on mine and Lee's experiences. Typically, the loudest pupils within the class almost get the opportunity single-handedly. So what we were passionate about was actually giving the power to the teachers to actually select pupils who may not necessarily participate in sport. It may not be a love for them at this moment. So we kind of tried to almost put them as the centerpiece of our program and almost emphasize the fact that, try something new, broaden your horizons. It may obviously improve your association of female empowerment. Leah, do you want to touch on the festivals we do as well?
A real benefit to us is we run a lot of girls only tournaments, whether that be football, multi-sports, etc. It's been great that I've been able to get out there and talk to the girls themselves and identify them young pupils on who may benefit from the programme. From that, we then discuss it with the teacher, and if that's something they feel their school would really benefit from, that's where we take it off from there.
Great. So alongside that, we have a comprehensive CPD staff training event, if you can see obviously from the images over there, where we bring together a variety of teams, not just obviously the primary stars team and the kicks team that Lee's a part of, where we obviously brainstorm, we come up with positive ideas that we'd like to implement, and also potential challenges that we may face. Going into schools, trying to engage young females who probably have a bad association, unfortunately, of sport at the moment. So it's almost trying to regularly review, set a game plan, and obviously we always review the programs pre and post to ultimately give the best value program that we possibly can at the foundation. We present the opportunity as an invitation, as a privilege, as you can see from one of the images just to the right of me. They require parental consent to take part. And it's almost just actually presenting to parents that your pupil has demonstrated great attitude to the learning, that they're nominated by a teacher to take part in an external opportunity that will help to promote the message of positive female empowerment. And again, based on our experience, they tend to really relish the opportunity. Wow, I've been invited to participate in an exclusive program that not a lot of other people get to partake in. Here we've just brought together a sample collection of teacher feedback. The key findings that we noticed, obviously from our pilot scheme, which we completed last year, teachers reported observing positive changes in students in the general mental well-being, levels of self-esteem, perceptions of female empowerment, which was a big key target for ourselves, and also knowledge of topics covered. Their overall attitude to school life, and more importantly, intrinsic motivation, had improved in terms of applying key workshop messages that we would complete into actually a practical capacity and also into the learning, boosted the resilience and coping strategies. So those were the key findings that we found. But what we tended to think about with the program was obviously giving a workshop-based activity. So that could be creating a collage of what female empowerment means to each individual. And then we would, like Leah said, maybe translate that into a football activity where they're talking about what's the best tactic to achieve this result today. For example, your team's gone 3-0 down in a final. How can you come together? What skills can you use to overturn that deficit? And almost presenting different scenarios at them that's almost testing their levels of resilience, motivation, and coping strategies without actually being a direct form of challenge for them. I'm going to hand over to Leah now to talk about the impact of our female program leads on the program. They've really enhanced the program. So Leah, would you like to cover that?
Yeah, so as well as delivering female empowerment in sessions, I also run the girls community football, so it was good to get into these schools and talk to these girls and let them know that there is a girls only opportunity for them to get out and away from schools. And through the sessions themselves, the girls' confidence did seem to grow, and we've had a number of girls come through. But a massive success story for me is one of the first schools we worked in. We had a pupil who was really nervous, really timid, and because we took her out of that big school classroom environment and we'd made the group size smaller, in a way there was nowhere for her to sort of hide at the back. She had to get involved. Now, from this, she was really nervous. She didn't want to be in the classroom with us. It took a lot of one-to-one intervention to get her involved. Now, the more she got involved, but it was the start of every week, she'd be really upset, not wanting to do anything. This had happened for the first 6 weeks. Towards the end, she was willingly getting involved, and it was great to see. But from this, we left the school after the programme had finished. And I'm lucky enough with my job, I get to work with high school girls as well. I went in and done an after school club at one of the local high schools. Now, this pupil had actually transitioned into the high school and was at our after school football club. And now that was great for me because it was massive. She would have never really put herself in that with a new group, trying new things. But not only had she been to the football, we'd had a chance to catch up, and she'd actually tried multiple new sports that she'd never done before, like the trampoline and gymnastics, stuff like that. Everything where she'd sit out in the background because she'd not done it before, so she didn't have the confidence to do it. She's now just thrown herself in at the deep end. And for me, that is what this programme's about, is giving them girls the confidence to do things like that.
Absolutely. And that was obviously from our pilot scheme, which obviously was a massive success that me and Leah piloted jointly. A key quote from Steph McCann, who's the head teacher at the local primary school. She really felt that the programme had bridged the gap on the playground. Like Leah mentioned, typically a playground is dominated by boys playing football, and girls are not obviously given that opportunity. So as female empowerment leads, they are now responsible, once myself and Leah leave the school, at facilitating their own lunchtime club. They've got their own space. We provide equipment for them to use. And again, it just really encourages other females to actually, take part in sports and not feel almost that they're not given the opportunity because the playground is typically busy. It's dominated by boys. So the outcomes of the programme, I'm just quickly going to show you on the next slide a typical questionnaire that we would look to give out to the girls, the participants, that would help to measure the impact that we would obviously look for. We are obviously bound by our Primary Stars funding to obviously ask a traditional number of questions. But what me and Leah thought as a team is some of the questions are not really applicable to measuring the impact of female empowerment. So we added an additional section just towards the centerpiece. I'm just trying to get my mouse to slide over there. Questions such as, I can use strong leadership skills in a team or school. I'm good at solving problems. Do you think other females see you as a positive role model? So actually adding those additional questions really helped us to measure the impact, which we're going to go through shortly in our data. So taking you back to our set data questionnaires, we normally facilitate these questionnaires at the start of the programme, at the end of week 1, and at the end of week 6, as it's a 6-week intervention period. And it allows us then to measure the impact. So from our results, as you can see, there was over 80 participants engaged from 4 different schools on an average capacity of 20 per school. We had a 100% improvement rate from the first questionnaire completed at the week 1. A lot of them answered yes a bit or not sure on a lot of the questions I've shown you a second ago, but that actually improved to yes a lot. And again, the pre-targeted female empowerment questions improved from 100% alongside the traditional Primary Stars questionnaires, which we are bound to ask as part of the questionnaire. But again, we were really satisfied with the responses. And also towards the final part of the sample questionnaire, we were really keen to actually give the girls the opportunity to draw and to, for girls who are slightly different, they may not typically understand questionnaires. For example, they might just circle emojis because it's what they like to do, for them to give a visual representation of the programme and how it's helped them. And we were obviously keen to branch that out to all of the learning styles, visual, auditory and kinesthetic. Our impact data, as we're looking to summarise our presentation now, all participating schools reported that they would recommend this programme to their colleagues and other schools, which equates to 7 out of 7 participating schools. We engaged with over 144 young females. We engaged with 7 teachers who were really a key part of the programme success, as well as ourselves as teachers and coaches. And there was in total 137 out of 144 pupils strongly agreed that their confidence when transitioning to high school had been affected as a direct consequence of the intervention. The programme legacy. Lee, would you like to touch on the legacy?
Yes, so at the end of the programme, all participants were awarded with Female Empowerment Champions wristband, celebrating their achievements. And I just give them that little bit extra to be proud of, that they've come through it. They then made a further pledge to promote positive female empowerment messages in the school to other pupils via lunchtime, targeted girls football clubs, and to support them with their ongoing female empowerment journey, a variety of goodie bags containing resources such as pens, thought journals, and links to local female grassroots organisations. Now, we worked with them 5 and 6 group, because they were then able to implement that throughout the younger pupils throughout the school. As we all know, that older side of Key Stage 2, people look up to them, especially the younger ones. So for them to be approachable and stuff like that, it was great to see.
Final slide now, everyone. Based on our programme reflection, as we mentioned at the start, we're always reviewing making small adaptations based on pupils, schools, what they require, what kind of style they require, what curriculum, for example. The programme successes we found was the application of more female faces for each lesson to help reaffirm key messages of female empowerment was absolutely fundamental. Girls seeing a positive female face like Leah in there, with links to obviously local grassroots organisations and events at LFC, ultimately extended the sporting pathway to them. We also prioritised this by having 3 members of female staff assisting with programme delivery. The teacher engagement was another key success in terms of sorting facilities for us, because we obviously did a workshop in a typical classroom setting based on exploring historical females, creating collages about female empowerment, what it means to them, and different activities like that, alongside moving over to a more practical session afterwards. So it was almost done on a 50-50 basis. There was a half-an-hour workshop provided and a half-an-hour practical session. So we were engaging all learning types. For example, some girls, for example, actually wanted to just take part in practical, but as the program went on, they started to appreciate that all of the messages they were receiving in the workshop needed to be applied practically, and that would extend and almost challenge their practical learning experience. A combination of the workshop and practical worked well and helped to embed all key messages, starting with a theory-based approach, however, applying it practically. Leah, do you want to cover that?
Yeah, so our future program.
Sorry, Leah, just a quick one on this one. So yeah, just a minute left, all right?
Yeah, no problem. We would like to arrange more face-to-face first team player visits to attend the celebration event at the end. We did achieve some of this virtually, but because of COVID, it was quite difficult this time round. We'd also been able to support them with tickets to the women's game, but we'd like to, on a bit more intimate level, and perhaps get them a training sessions so they can add more Q&A from the girls. We'd also like to include an additional equality workshop assembly for all Key Stage 2 groups to extend the female empowerment message, and also pre-printed work booklets for young people. This would ensure that all worksheets kept together and previous work can be recorded and looked back on for recaps.
And I think the final one from me, everyone, we are looking to roll this out, but also we're actually extending this to male attendees as well as females, because obviously, as we've mentioned today, having that awareness about females differences and almost celebrating that, we're looking to extend that out to male pupils to just see what impact that can make on their perception of the term female empowerment. From myself and Leah, thank you very much for listening to our presentation. Over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Chris and Leah. That's fantastic, and really impressed. We know that there's significant inequalities in terms of females and participation in sport activity, and this female empowerment program seems to be really, really exciting, and the pilot seems to have gone really well. And it's really encouraging to see how the girls have reported, you know, positive changes to their confidence and self-esteem as a result of your program. So fantastic, well done. Okay, so we're going to get some more examples now. Hopefully, if there's any questions for Leah and Chris, please put them in the chat and we'll put them in the Q&A at the end of the case study speaker presentations. The next speaker is Cyndi Mendoza. I'm really excited to introduce Cyndi. She's going to talk about the Skateistan program. Cyndi, do you mind sharing your slides and we'll hand over to you?
Yes, great. Thank you so much. Just gonna. Can everyone see them okay?
Can't see your slides yet.
Okay, I think it might take a bit. Let's just try that again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's working great.
All right, awesome. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for a really incredible presentations. It's been really insightful. My name is Cyndi Mendoza, and I'm Skateistan's program director. And today I'll be talking about how we use skateboarding, empowering children through skateboarding and education. So, great. So Skateistan started in Kabul in 2008 in the fountain, what you guys can see here in the picture. And the program started based on a response to the kids. So Oliver, our founder, was in Afghanistan and had skateboards and started getting kids involved in skateboarding. Because of this, girls' inclusion actually came quite naturally to us because it was obvious, and you can see from this picture that they were keen to participate in our programs. How did we become a skate school? So from the fountain, what you guys saw, which was a very informal skateboarding session in a place in Afghanistan, in Kabul in 2008, to now a Skateistan skate school. And I'll speak a little bit more about our other skate schools all around the world. Again, the reason why we created a skate school, which is quite different from other models, was responding to the needs of the children. So in the context of Afghanistan, particularly for women and girls to participate in sport, we needed to think about safety, but we also needed to think about privacy. So thinking about these different needs, we decided to build a facility, and all of our facilities that are built today are like state-of-the-art skateboarding facilities that also have classrooms where children can both do skateboarding and learning, which I'll touch a little bit more on later today. And also, why did we incorporate education? Again, this was a response from the kids. The kids said that they wanted to go to school. So that's why we started doing education. And really starting to get to know the community right away, and making sure that we were responding to the needs of the community and to the people in the countries that we work in, and not the other way around, which we have seen sometimes in development. So how do we do this? Again, so by empowering the people that are normally usually have their visions imposed on them, we really put at the forefront of our work young people, women, children with disability, and those living in the various countries that we work in to tell us what they need, and we respond to this. So yeah, as you can see, these are two girls in our programs in Afghanistan, and we can proudly say that we've had thousands of girls participate in our skateboarding programs in Afghanistan and in our various locations. So normally, we really value ourselves in a local-based approach. So all of our staff locally are from the countries that we work in. So in Afghanistan, all of our staff will be from Afghanistan. In South Africa, all of our staff is from South Africa. All of them are young. We really value having female staff. We have, I would say, over about 65% female staff. And this has recently dropped due to the situation in Afghanistan, which I'll touch on a little bit. And so people come for skateboarding. That's how we get people excited to join our programs, but then they stay for learning. And we really value the combination of both the skateboarding and what they learn in the classroom. It really creates a unique tool to teach children life skills and knowledge that can empower them at different aspects of their lives. So we have 5 key programs. In Afghanistan, we have a program that's called Back to School, which is looking at getting kids that have been left out of the school system back into it. We also have our flagship program, which is Skate and Create, and that looks at an hour of skate instruction and an hour of creative education. And this program is it's done all over in the various countries. I'll touch on how the programs differ per country. And within the Skate and Create model, the creative education allows us to reach hard to reach youth who might not be literate, might have different levels of literacy. So really using creative education, we're able to go to the level of the children and kind of meet the children where they're at, but making sure that they're learning. And all of our material is an extension of Skateistan's core values, which is creativity, fun, quality, equality, and trust. So we trust the local staff in our various countries to identify key issues and to contextualize all of the lesson plans that they do. And also just to highlight as well, so skateboarding, it's recently become an Olympic sport, which is quite exciting. But it is, although it is an individual sport, using skateboarding really teaches, encourages self-determination, a growth mindset. So if they fall, like they get back up again. So that sport in itself is quite unique to our approach. And to learn more about our programs, we use various monitoring evaluation data collection tools. We use Emily application, which is an application built for Skateistan that monitors our programs. So we're able to see what's happening in our various programs at any given point, like as instantly as the data is inputted. We also do pre and post surveys and focus groups and interviews. And I would say that we really value qualitative information as well. And we use stories of growth, which is based on a most significant change approach. So here, yeah, as I mentioned, we started in Afghanistan, but we now have expanded to Cambodia, South Africa, Jordan, and we've recently started programs in Kenya and Bolivia, and I'll touch on some exciting new expansion projects shortly. So our programs look different in the various countries because the local needs of the various communities are different. So in Cambodia, there's a really big focus on working with children living with disabilities. And they've really pioneered this at Skateistan, and we've seen them be able to expand on this. So we work with various partners, and they've also been able to equip our teams in the other countries to also start reaching children with disabilities, which is really amazing. And we actually had a really awesome story of growth recently, which it was on Opa's story, and they are a Skateistan participant, and they were coming there. It's a child living with autism, so usually they need assistance to participate in social activities and sport activities. And in the beginning, he was quite scared to do skateboarding. He was very timid. His mother mentioned to us that he was like quite isolated, didn't want to interact with people. But slowly but surely, he really came out of his shell at Skateistan and has loved skateboarding and loves learning. And during the lockdown, it was particularly difficult for, in Cambodia, it was quite strict, but our team was quite creative and was sending remote lessons to children like Opa, and they were still able to participate in programs, which was really, really great. And in South Africa, I really like to characterize South Africa as our innovation hub. They're very innovative, always thinking on their feet, and they've pioneered things like parenting workshops and really focusing on providing safe spaces for quality time to do their homework with our dropping in program for inner city kids of Johannesburg. So again, really relevant to the local needs and context. So just for a new chapter for us, for Skateistan, for over a decade, as I mentioned, thousands of children in Afghanistan found a safe space at Skateistan where they could learn to skateboard, learn and really dream. But unfortunately, in August 2021, we suspended all of our programs there for the first time since 2009 due to the change in government. We did successfully, I would say, and proudly were able to assist over 150 staff and family members who chose to leave Afghanistan to find other homes around the world. So yeah, this chapter was, and this time it's a very challenging time. We're still going through this today. It was a chance to really rethink about our model, which, as I mentioned, was building state-of-the-art skate parks and schools, skate schools, that's what we call them, to be a little bit more agile and not as heavy on infrastructure, because the ones in Afghanistan, we're slowly rebuilding, but we haven't been able to access them. So yeah, we're looking and quite ambitious to expand all the lessons we've learned over the last 10 years to be in 20 new locations, reaching over 4,500 attendances by the end of 2022. And you can go to our website to read a little bit more about this journey and find out how you can get involved as well. So touching on some of our staff relocating to different places all around the world, we've really been able to churn in, which is quite a tragic and traumatic experience for a lot of Afghan families and communities, also into an opportunity, but again, an opportunity that was identified by our staff. And I'm always very awed and inspired by our staff's resilience. So our staff who have gone to different areas like in the US, in Europe, reached out to us and said, listen, we want to continue and we see a need to run Skateistan programs in the refugee camps where they might find themselves in, or in resettlement cities. So in these pictures here, you'll see on the left is a student from our resettlement city project with our partner. It's called the Rolling Resettlement Project in Rochester, New York, which is being led by former Skateistan staff at a school with Afghan community. And then to the right here, we have one of our previous staff members as well, who is transitioning to Canada and is currently based in Albania. And they are running Skate and Create, our flagship program with students in Albania. So yeah, just really, really impressive and quite inspiring. So yeah, just to touch on here. So here we see a picture of, as we look to expand, a really big question for ourselves as an organization, making sure quality is a value at Skateistan. Like, how do we make sure that we're able to provide quality programs at scale? So as we started to think about this, and a few years back, we were able to launch an initiative, and we found ourselves that a lot of organizations reach out to Skateistan for help. And for some time, we were a bit hesitant about this. And I think, sometimes in the nonprofit sector, there could be like a scarcity mindset of like, what's, this is mine, this is yours. But we really kind of flipped that on its head. And we decided to create Good Push, which is Skateistan's knowledge sharing platform and support to other social skateboarding projects around the world. When it started, it was only a few social skate projects, as you could see from this picture, and now it's grown to supporting over 600 social skateboarding projects around the world. And we share our methodology, we share resources, and really looking to assist other people to implement some of our learnings and some of our successes as well, like both learnings, like not to do what we did wrong, but some of our successes into their programs. And then just for finishing off as I wrap up, this is a picture of our Good Push toolkit, but something else which is quite exciting with Good Push, and that is really helping us expand into new locations, is we've recently launched an e-learning platform which is available to everyone. So if you go to our Good Push website, you'll be able to access e-learning courses. We have courses ranging from child protection policy to trauma-informed skateboarding to looking at how to add creative education, not only to skateboarding programs, but to sport programming. You might be able to incorporate some of these key lessons that we've learned into your projects. So yeah, we're really excited that we've launched that, and we are using a combination of our e-learning courses with online support to partner with wonderful people. So like our refugee project with Kapow in Belgium to reach new communities that we wouldn't have been able to work with otherwise. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really inspired to hear what everyone else is doing around the world, and yeah, hand it over back to you.
Thank you so much, Cyndi. That was awesome. And, you know, really inspired to hear about all the work that you've been doing at Skateistan and the power of skateboarding, really, in terms of, you know, helping people in Afghanistan, the refugees and so on. Really, it's quite inspirational what you've been doing, and the creative education and the skateboarding schools sound fantastic. So audience, if you do have questions for Cyndi, please put them in the chat and we will put them to her in the Q&A that will be after our last case study presentation. Thank you, Cyndi. So we're going to pass over now to Rashad. Rashad from the Caribbean Association of the National Olympic Committees, who's going to talk about their work in terms of sport and education for all.
Hi, thanks very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I know we have people from a lot of different countries in the world, so we're dealing with different time zones. Okay, so today I'm going to give you all Cannock's presentation for Sport for All and Education, and I titled it Learning is Winning. So just a brief background of what Cannock is and what Cannock stands for. Cannock is the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees, and it includes all National Olympic Committees, Commonwealth Games Associations, and associate members. It has around 30 members, and it's important to note that this year is very important because next year will be Cannock's 20th anniversary. So a lot of positive changes are being made. The objectives highlighted by Cannock in its constitution, they directly relate to this work forum here today, and I'm excited to give you all a perusal of one of them because it shows the foresight that the initial founding members had for Cannock. The main objective is to promote, encourage, and assist sport development, and physical recreation throughout the Caribbean for the benefit of the nations and peoples of the Caribbean. So I just want to talk to you all about some traditional sports we practice here in Cannock and its island states. Apart from like the main sports around the world that include cricket, football, and track and field, here in the Caribbean, we are traditionally engaged in sports such as morel, hopscotch, and marbles. So for anyone in the call who's from the Caribbean, when they hear these sports, they will definitely smile because it all takes them back to their childhood, you know. In certain countries in the Caribbean, such as Tobago, we have specific sports such as goat racing and crab racing. Needless to say, you literally tie some ropes around the goat or the crab, and whichever goat or crab reaches to the finish line first, that's who wins. We are in the tropics, so it's important to highlight as well that we have not traditionally been engaged in winter sports. I want to delve into participation in sports in the Caribbean. The reality of the situation is that in the Caribbean, we are all descendants of a colonial development. So our makeup, our history is directly hinged upon slavery and its effects. As a result, there are deep-rooted beliefs and patterns that are still present in our society even to this day. And a lot of these beliefs have to do with academics and whether or not they are prioritized. Needless to say, in the Caribbean, unfortunately, historically and continuing, sport and physical education have not been deemed priorities. So somebody would ask, why is this the case? You know, the fastest man in the history of track and field is from the Caribbean, you know? So why is the attitude towards sports the way it is? And it's pretty simple, you know? Historically and culturally, sports has not been viewed as a sustainable way of upward mobility in the Caribbean. It's sad to say, but it's the truth that professions related to sport, such as physical education, teachers, administrators, sports medicine personnel, and shockingly, even athletes, they are looked down upon or shunned upon in our society, which is the case, but I have to highlight it. You know, in the Keynote Island states, students K through 12, they're usually led to traditional job pathways that can include business, science, law, or medicine. And the benefits of this forum here today is because this shows the limitation of this ideology that we have here in the Caribbean, because it provides insight as to where there's the lack of inclusivity for other pathways to upward mobility, such as sports. I would like to highlight a major key here today. Why is education so important, and how can that be linked to sport for all? Now in Keynote, the underlying issue lies in uprooting this ideology that has plagued our society for so many years. As we know, education takes into account health and well-being and the significance of movement, as Mr. Dudley pointed out earlier. So why we need education, especially as it relates to sport for all, is because it at the crux of it all, it enhances and supports academic activity and the health of our communities. Now, in the Keynote states, because a lot of these islands are third world nations or developing nations, a lot of the governments have been engaging in national programs, such as technological programs, agricultural programs, and small business programs. But I would like to say that I think all of these programs should be designed in such a way that physical movement is included. And as Dr. Dudley stated before, all of these things can show the benefits. Now, there are challenges in promoting sport for all in these kind of island states. I touched on one before, the ideology. We still have some deep-rooted values where prior, it's common knowledge that academically bright students in these islands, they are often showed preference to students who may be highly skilled athletes or artists. So for examinations, for example, the emphasis is on how many academic passes one can achieve. However, going forward, once curriculum changes occur, I believe that recreational sport as well as physical activity must be prioritized. Even though we are developing nations here in Keynote, we do have a vast amount of facilities. So one may ask themselves, where does the challenge arise? The challenge arises because there's often the underutilization of these facilities because there's the limited implementation of stated policies that Keynote have presented that are not translated into viable projects, programs, and actions within these island states. It's always, now this part of the presentation brings a smile to my face because it shows the positive light of what we're working towards here in Keynote. And we want to always state how education can be used in conjunction with sport for all. You know, there needs to be an ideological shift within the Caribbean, we know that, but that starts with education. The holistic education of the importance of sports needs to be highlighted to every individual, household, community, country, and the region as a whole. That needs to be indoctrinated into our countries. If you ask anyone around the world, that this might be my personal bias, But if you ask anyone around the world who has the best carnival, I am sure 9 times out of 10, somebody will say the Caribbean has the best carnival. You know, it shows who we are. Our history is one in which we have always used a lot of dance and movement. But now, going forward, we can educate our society to translate and transfer this natural gift that we have, an inclination to include education on the significance and value of the cultural inheritance. You know, as the guys from Liverpool Foundation stated, the education can be used in terms of sport for all in many ways, but it can also help in terms of assisting with the mental and psychological makeup of students, more specifically young females in their presentation. Now, I just wanna highlight some of the impacts of sport for all on certain issues here. Once implemented into the formal education system, this will cater to less privileged children who may live in housing communities. So me, myself, I grew up in a housing community where after school, I would get home, and I've always been fortunate to be blessed with responsible parents. So once I did my homework and whatnot, I would immediately go to socialize and have fun with my friends outdoors. So my informal education as it pertains to physical activity has always been one that included movement outside of the school. Now, why I'm saying that the impact of sport for all is so great, especially in Kana communities, is because traditionally within the classroom, we do not emphasize movement and physical activity. So we're technically excluding a lot of young people who are accustomed to that in their informal learning. So once we merge that, I believe we'll be on the right path. You know, then further way down the line, this will be able to dismantle barriers that previously limited access to higher qualities of life. In terms of the bigger picture and the national perspective, the economic benefits of sport and physical education will also be great because a healthier workforce is a more productive workforce. Now, I just wanted to, in closing, briefly, I just wanted to highlight TAFISA's role and TAFISA's impact in conjunction with Keynote and how it impacts the member states here. TAFISA currently runs 12 CLC courses in the Caribbean, 8 of which are in Trinidad and Tobago, and there are others in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, and Curacao. I believe it is my vehement belief that there needs to be the continued provision of these courses in conjunction with more Kana countries, because people need to be constantly educated. It isn't enough to just have one forum and then you stop there. We need to have this constant dialogue between TAFISA and Kana so that people can be constantly educated. Furthermore, I believe that the Sport for All initiative, it needs to continue to engage influential leaders across the region and across sectors. In closing, I would say something, and I want to really harp on this, especially as it relates to the Keynote member states, island states. Sport for all and physical activity must become a cornerstone of our collective and revised thinking within the context of both our formal and informal education systems. I believe once this is done, we can move forward as a society and we'll see the vast benefits of sport for all. Thank you very much.
Rashad, thank you very much for that, and a really important message to end with there in terms of raising the profile of sport activity and its importance to children and people and everyone really in terms of their development and their well-being, but also highlighting the challenges, you know, that historically of us putting sport and activity on the agenda, the political agenda, the financial agenda, making sure it's appropriately funded, and it's important the work you're doing with TAFISA to raise the profile of sport and activity to hopefully increase the opportunities for the populations in the Caribbean there. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so we're gonna now have some questions. from the audience. So audience, if you do have questions for any of our case study speakers, feel free to put these in the chat now, and I will put these to the speakers. We will put any questions to Chris and Leah from Liverpool FC Foundation first, just because they need to leave very shortly to go and deliver a session at a school. So very busy people need to go quite quickly. So I will put any questions to those first. If there are any for those people. I think there might be one coming in.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I noticed one. Sorry, Lawrence. I think I noticed one from Stephen earlier in regards to measuring the impact of schools in marginalised areas. So I'll cover that if that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Go for it.
Yep. So in terms of the question there, Stephen, the pilot scheme was engaging between 6 and 8 primary schools, and what we did was we have what are called funded schools, where they provided provision free of charge from being in areas of deprivation. Obviously, our office is based in Anfield, so a lot of schools around there. And then we also offer the pilot scheme out to schools who pay for our services in our PE Plus core package. So in terms of a study, I'm really interested to actually do that myself. So I'm looking to maybe complete that research and seeing has it had a greater effect on pupils from within marginalised areas, so our funded schools, than opposed to obviously our schools who pay for our services. But really good question. And from our side, we're looking to complete a study, and hopefully if we have an opportunity to come and do a guest spot again, we'd love to answer that question for you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Just one follow-up question, I guess, for you as well, is from Jeremy, who basically asked about, is there anything where you're looking at long-term monitoring of the impact of the program? So do you plan to maybe track these girls over time to see how they've whether they've got into more community programs, for example? Is there any long-term evaluation?
Leah, do you want to cover that?
Yeah, so when we sort of register the girls for the program anyway, it's all on one database. So then any stuff they come across, we register again, and obviously we cross that over so we can keep an eye on if they come to any other community stuff, whether it be football, multi-sport, any of our additional interventions and stuff like that.
So we tend to cross-examine, everyone, like Lee was mentioning. We have them on a database and registered, for example, that we complete. And we also offer weekly football tournaments at obviously our Anfield Sports Centre, multi-sports festivals. And I also facilitate on some educational workshops where we have guest speakers come in from around the city, different agencies promoting key messages from the Primary Stars Awareness Calendar. And again, we tend to just cross-reference the names, and if we see them, see the regular attendees, we're lucky to have the likes of Leah, the Kicks team. We've got other wonderful teams, and they kind of promote their own educational opportunities for them via leaflets. And we always tend to refer them to our foundation website as well, to promote as many opportunities for them as possible.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Leah, Chris, thank you very much. I realise you have to go now, so really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much, Lawrence. Thanks everyone for listening and taking the time today. Thank you, TAFISA.
Thank you
very much. Okay, so we've got a question for Cyndi. Cyndi, can you let us know if Skateistan has a strategy to work with groups or organisations that can make use of the Good Push platform and toolkit? And also, are you offering any support beyond the freely and openly available resources?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. So in terms of Good Push, we do have like a strategy, and Good Push is actually looking to expand at the moment. So if you go to the Good Push website and you become a member, then you'll get access to, sometimes they have webinars. There was an online Good Push Summit that was available, which touched on a variety of topics that were identified by the network that were of need. So like child protection, monitoring, evaluation. So if you sign up as a member, then you could get access to all that. And then with regard to the second question, we are working with organizations above and beyond the available resources. So within the Innovation Fund, which is an expansion that I'm leading, our first project, as I mentioned, was working in refugee camps and resettlement cities. So if you are an organization that is working in the city and would like to incorporate skateboarding and creative education, you can get in touch with us. I'll put an email there. And then the second one is our Skateistan in a Box strategy. which is also looking to partner with organizations. We've just started a partnership in Lebanon. You get some financial support as well as equipment and our programmatic support to start Skateistan programs wherever you are. So we do have an expression of interest form. I can pop the link in the chat, or maybe we can send it out in the email as well, should opportunities. So at the moment, we've already kind of identified some partners for the time being. We'd love to work with as many people as we can, but also just being in terms of quality, making sure that we're mindful that we're able to kind of hold that space for our partners. So yeah, I'll post that in the chat. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Cyndi. And the Skateistan in the box sounds like a brilliant concept. So I really like that idea. Okay, so Rashad, we've got a question for you. It's how can the Caribbean encourage sport to be seen as a viable professional career for the youth, similar to maybe banking or engineering or doctors? That's from Kyle.
Well, thanks, Kyle. That's an excellent question, actually. And I think it goes back to the presentation. It all has to do with education. You know, right now, today, sports is $1 billion industry. Professional sports is $1 billion industry. But what we're really harping on here is sport for all. There are so many different aspects of sport that once you break it down, you can see the financial and economic benefits of it, you know. And once that is educated, once the population is educated and that is communicated with them, I think you would see more constant participation. Thanks, guys.
Rashad, thank you. Dean, if I can, I'll just bring you back in. Dean, I was wondering, so obviously an important part of the education and sport for all agenda is that we do monitor the impact of these programs. We do collect evidence. So I just wonder if you, from a researcher, would have any kind of tips in terms of for these community organizations on that kind of agenda.
Yep. Plan your evaluation before you get underway. Don't try and do it retrospectively. It's always, it's not that we can't do it, but from a research perspective, it's always hard to do it when the program's in play and you're carrying a lot of bias because you've invested a lot of energy and capacity into your program. So I've heard some really interesting things tonight, and you know, if you want to work with researchers and do some post evaluation, we can do it, but it's never going to be as strong as if, you know, you're starting a program, and whether it be the Skateistan stuff really fascinated me too, by the way. I'm a surfer, and I know the gateway into surfing is skateboarding. So it's just one of those great activities that has a good crossover skill. But you know, what we're encouraging, what we're trying to do more of is when people have these, and there's so many great ideas, but I think what you're all starting to realize is that there's so many people out there with so many great ideas, and guess what? They're all working. But at the end of the day, because there's only so many, so we have limited resources, we have limited human capacity, we've really got to just try and make some better decisions and learn from each other too, right? So one of the things that I talk about in the physical literacy space, there's a paper I wrote around critical considerations, is that what happens is we compete at the margins rather than adopt a more essentialist mindset, is saying, what do we do that's really well, or what do we do really well and that's unique and that we can prove that we can have the most effect in? So for example, if a skating program has phenomenal impact on, let's just say, social learning. I'm being argumentative here because I'm pretty sure it has some great stuff in psychomotor too, as well. Is you want to be able to get those programs in and up and running, but you also don't want to, you know, if another activity, you know, might do stuff in the better cognitive stage, rather than claim that space, try and think of where those collaborative partnerships work, because you'll get a multiplier effect. So how can I couple this program with another program that targets something else that I'm interested in and work together and to enhance each other? So one, set your evaluations up front. as best as possible, as pragmatically as possible. I know you can't always just fund a randomized control trial, but think about how you're going to collect the evidence before you get started. Be really objective and hard, like take your ideas out, get critical friends in and hit them really hard. So when you do get the results, is that it gives you space to grow, and it gives you space to connect, and it gives you space to think differently about what you're doing. Because I think what everyone's starting to realize is that you are in contested space, and contested space is great, but with everybody shouting, our programs are great, our programs have an impact, it's a very easy claim to make. The hard claim is to have the evidence behind you to justify it. Okay, so that would be my advice. And anyone that I do lots of work with sporting organizations, not-for-profits in this space, because I know they're doing great work. And then it's about just getting down to the essentials. What are you truly great at? And let's sell that, right? Let's show where you have those greater than average effect sizes more than other people are likely to, because that's where you'll get more investment. You'll get more traction in the space more broadly.
Thanks,
I hope
Dean.
that answers your question, Lawrence.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. I'm just going to have a quick scan of the chat now. There's a question here from Manuel. Manuel basically asks about, what about the people who lost motivation to do sports because maybe they had a bad experience in the past? They don't like it, a negative experience really. Is it possible to get those people back into sports and activities? So maybe if I go to we'll go to Dean for a quick answer, and then to Cyndi, if that's all right.
The answer is yes. Quick answer is yes. And there are multiple entry points for that. So we find, if you've had someone that's had negative experience in childhood and adolescence, the next big entry point is parenthood. Right? And quite often we negate the power of what becoming a parent means. And a quick answer is, I have seen a wonderful intervention that has used parenthood, becoming a dad especially, or a mum, as the re-entry point back into physical activity. The tragedy I've seen on the far end is play and movement and sport being farmed out externally because parents don't think it's part of their job anymore, and they've lost that ability. So if you're working on any sport, any program, if you can get something that's around parenthood and getting parents participating with their kids, you're on to a winner. Now, I'm a surf lifesaver in Australia. I don't know if you know what that means. It has a sport. It's all surf-based activity. And the great thing about surf lifesaving is you do it with your kids. And there are numerous activities that I've seen do that. There's a program in Australia called the Dads and Daughters program, and it's phenomenal. And it works almost exclusively with cricket now. But parenthood is your next big opportunity. But don't underestimate, the transition years, polytechnics and the college years, about how we've adapted those sporting structures really effectively with alternative sports, the non-traditional cultural sports. So lots of other ones. The other one is retirement. So we're seeing great programs for those people we call them, the silver nomads or the graying population, all right? Keeping them playing for longer, we know has massive impacts on things like mental health and dementia and a whole range of other aging processes. So that's your other big opportunity. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Dean. Cyndi, what do you think about re-engaging those children who maybe who've had, or the older generation who've had negative experience of activity in sport? Is that something you've found with the skateboarding? Have you found that that's a vehicle to re-engage those who've maybe had more negative experiences with other activities in sports?
Yeah, so I think building off like the parent workshops, I think our South African team has been able to do that really well. Like also with a non-traditional sport like skateboarding, we have, it takes a lot of community building, and that includes stakeholders that are parents. So getting the parents involved, having them come to sessions, seeing what people are doing, getting them excited about it, it really helps to the contribution or like the success of kids being able to come to your programs. And then also depending on the context. So I think it's really important that it's context dependent and also cultural dependent. So in Afghanistan, for instance, like really, and in Cambodia, like engaging with the community itself and having community buy-in is extremely important. So working with the elders of the community, making sure that there's that they understand what our program's about, inviting them for a community event or having outreach event, which is one of the programs that we do. So we take skateboarding and creative education to the community. That really helps to get people involved that were maybe, like as you said, had a bad experience or were forgotten altogether. So that really works, or we've seen that work from our experience.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cyndi. Rashad, I don't know if you had anything to offer from your side on that perspective.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to say is that we're now coming out of a global pandemic where everyone was basically neutralized at home, where a lot of people got more tech savvy. So I think an alternative way of, if you became unmotivated, an alternative way of becoming more motivated once again is by engaging in sports virtually first. Remember, it's sport for all and education. So it entails all types of education. And I believe that that's also an avenue that we can use to get someone who is unmotivated in sport physically into virtually, and then they can get back into the group.
You mentioned in your presentation about the non-traditional sports in the Caribbean. So hopscotch, marbles. I like to see marbles.
Yeah, moral.
Do you think that those activities are more accessible to those people who maybe have had negative experiences?
I definitely, within Keynote Island states, yes, it definitely is, because you don't need anything. You don't need any resources for that. You literally just pick up a marble, and if you don't have marbles, you use stones. Yeah. You know, if you don't have chalk to draw on the floor for when you want to play those other games, you could use stones and draw on the floor. So I think it's definitely accessible for sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. Rashad, thank you very much. Okay, so we are, I think, drawing to a close now. So I want to again thank our fantastic range of speakers, Dr. Dean Dudley from Macquarie University and the University of Queensland, Australia, for a fantastic speech that really highlighted how we deliver content in PE can really influence different outcomes. I want to thank Chris and Leah from Liverpool SC Foundation, who showed us the fantastic work they've been doing around female empowerment. Cyndi Mendoza from Skateistan with their skateboarding school and the creative education work, which is really inspiring, especially what we've been doing in Afghanistan and elsewhere. And finally, Rashad Hyacenth from Keynote, who has shared the challenges, if you like, really of putting sport activity on the agenda and really advocating for the power of sport and education for all. Thank you, Rashad. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So just a reminder, the recording of this talk will be made available on the TAFISA YouTube channel. You'll be able to access it there. I hope you've enjoyed the presentations as much as I had. And thank you very much for joining us. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.